Hello again. Welcome back to the Mark Chi School for kids who can't code good and want to learn to do other stuff good too. Is it stuff or things? It keeps changing. Anyway, so welcome to what is the first video in the Getting Started with Programming series. So I'm going to be taking us through learning to code from scratch. So that means if you've never done any programming before, this works for you. If you've done some programming before, but you'd like a kind of a structured approach to really getting to know what you're doing, this series of videos is going to work out quite well for you. So before we can really get too deep into the code, I wanted to teach people how to get a bunch of things just set up on their computer so that we can get the basics of writing some code and having a computer run that code and getting a chance to see what's happening. So I have a particular setup I'm using for this, which is a particular program called Visual Studio Code that a lot of people are using. And this video is just me talking about how to get this thing set up and how to get the basics going in it. So let's hop over to my teaching scene where you can see my desktop and what's going on here. And this is Visual Studio Code running. So I've got it already installed, but I am going to talk about how to get it installed as well. I'm running on a Windows PC here, which I have assumed is the majority. It's not always going to be the majority of people learning programming, but it might be. There will be ways to do this with an Apple or Linux computer as well. I don't actually have all of the details there because I'm not running either of them at the moment. I'm just running a Windows machine. So I'll show you what it is in Windows, and I will look into finding a way to maybe show people how to do it with the other systems as well. But for now, I'll show you how to get this thing going in Windows. So this is Visual Studio with a Python program here. This is like the most simple Python program. But before we get too deep into that, I want to show you how to actually get this thing going. There's one easy way to do it. If you go to the Microsoft Store, I actually didn't do this for all of this, but you can actually just look up. I've got the two searches here that I did earlier. Visual Studio Code, you will find this. It's made by Microsoft. So it's going to work pretty well on a Windows machine because it's made by the same people. And you can click install here. I'm not going to do this right now because I've actually got it installed via another means and running, but I'll show you that in a second. You click install here, it's going to install this program. You will then be able to run it via the icon wherever that ends up, probably in your start menu and things like that. The other thing that we need to do, because in this course we'll be working in a programming language called Python, and so what we need to run that is a Python interpreter, which we can also get by just searching Python here. And we're going to go for the most recent one, Python 3.1.0 at the moment. This is the most recent one. So what are we today? 29th of August, 2022 is when I'm recording this. There might be a newer version. For what we're doing in this starter series slash course thing, I wouldn't be too worried about which version it is. I mean, I probably wouldn't use any of the version 2s of Python, just the version 3, but even that might still work. And if it doesn't, there might be just minimal changes to make a difference. I haven't done very much developing at all in Python 2 or even Python 3, so I don't really have any in-depth knowledge of what is or isn't going to work here, but I know that we're using only really the basics, and so unless they've changed something fundamental, which I'm not sure they have, then you'll be safe with Python 3.1.0. We're probably not going to use 3.11 because this is RC here, which stands for Release Candidate, which is not a full release, it's more of a testing thing, so we would use this 3.1 here. And there would be an install button here. I actually did install this one from the Microsoft Store. There's actually some funny things that happen in Visual Studio Code where if you actually type Python into one part of Visual Studio Code, it automatically takes you to the Microsoft Store. So with both those things installed, I would get some of the capability to work with Python on my computer. If you don't want to use the Microsoft Store, or your Microsoft Store is not working for you, you can install these things directly, which is actually one of the things I did here. So I've gone half-half on my own install, where one of the applications, Visual Studio Code, the actual code editor, um, is installed from just a download that I did, and Python was installed through the store. So there's a difference between these two things. VS Code, as we call it for short, is a program that allows you to, when it boils down to a nutshell, edit text. It's much more capable than just a text editor, but it allows you to type in text. Like I can type in anything I want here, and it appears in this file, and I can save this file, save, or I can press Control S. I'm going to be using Control S more as keyboard shortcut, so I can save this file and things like that. Which means that we're also able to create and save our files that we're working with when we're coding. A lot of what we're going to be doing is sort of just going to be kept in one file. We're not going to be doing some overly complex stuff. It's more about learning what the code does than structuring big complicated programs. So we're not going to be doing like a big app at the end of this series. This is going to be reasonably simple. If you're interested in the sort of longer term goals of this, I have a previous video which I'll link to maybe in the description or something, which is like an overview of what this is. But anyway, if you want to install VS Code or Python via things you can download from the web, I've got these two pages here that I've prepared in advance. One of them is code.visualstudio.com, or you can just search Visual Studio Code in Google and then you'll find this, and you can download the stable build for this here. Pretty sure you can also just download the builds for other operating systems as well. So if you have another operating system, this is an easy way to get it done. Also, Python. So the Python thing that we are downloading is known as an interpreter. So it's a thing that can read the code that we've written, and as it's reading the code, translate it into commands to give our computer to actually do things. I am going to be talking more about the idea of how our computer interprets code, how it actually deals with the stuff that we're writing. Like we're going to be writing a programming language, which is a very formal form of language. It's like partially human readable, partially machine readable, but we'll get to that in detail. This video is really just about getting us set up before we start talking about the theory of what we're doing and things. So here, Python, I can download here. I could press this button and I could download um, uh, the current version of Python here. And you can see other platforms. So I could click on OS, sorry, here and get the Python release for Apple computers. Other platforms, I'm going to assume that there is a Linux, yeah, or alternative Python packages for Linux. I think there's actually, there isn't specifically one here, but I'm pretty sure there's a way to do it for Linux anyway. Either that or it's supporting it out of the box nowadays. I'm not sure, actually. Haven't actually run my own Linux distro in a while. Those of you who are playing around with Linux, I'm pretty sure there's a reasonably easy way to just pick it up. I remember there used to be like package managers and stuff like that, which is like, single command to grab something like Python. Okay, so those are the two fundamental pieces that we're going to start with. Something that we can write code with, and something that our computer can read our code with so that it can run. So those two, I don't really want to call them programs, sort of programs, we're going to download and install. So after that installation, we'll be at a point where Visual Studio would be able to do part of what it needs to do. The other thing that we're going to do is install something in VS Code. I should point out, because I just called it Visual Studio a second ago, there's two versions. There's Visual Studio, which is actually a much bigger and more involved program, and VS Code, which is very cut down, and it doesn't have many extra features in it when you download it. But you can download those features one at a time, so it sort of remains as small as you're going to use it for. Whereas Visual Studio, which is the older version, kind of, I mean, it's still being updated. It's not deprecated. It's not so old that no one uses it, but it tends to have a lot of functionality built into it. So VS Code is closer to a text editor than Visual Studio is. But anyway, we're using VS Code. So for us to work with Python, we'd want to install an extension. So I've clicked on extensions here, and there's a bunch of extensions, but I have a list here of things I've already installed. So let's remove that for the moment so that you can see what happens when I type in Python here. It's going to do a search for me, and there's one here, and I think it's important that you don't necessarily look at all the different ones. You look at the one that has the tick from Microsoft, which is the verified one that works with VS Code. I'm sure plenty of the other ones here are going to work as well, but I like to use the one that's just like, okay, this is the one that VS Code knows works with Python. And so you can click on this, and you would have a button to install this here. Mine's already installed, so mine says disable or uninstall. If you haven't installed it yet, you'll have an option to install it here. What this does, as opposed to Visual Studio Code and the Python program that we'd installed, that either allow you to write code or read the code. This is just an extension to the text editor that gives you these nice colored things. So this would mean that Visual Studio Code here will be able to partially read the code and say, this is what I think you're doing. It can even tell you whether there's an error as well. So I just took off a bracket there. And so code, I'm going to talk more about this later, but code is kind of specific about what it does. And it'll tell me there that like this, it's like a spell checker. It basically means it has a spell checker for specific Python grammar. So it's helpful to have that because it can correct your mistakes. Just going to save my file in a working state. It can find your mistakes before you make them, which is kind of nice. So it's like installing the spell checker for Python, kind of what I installed here. It's more than that, right? But we'll get into learning about all this stuff bit by bit as we go along. So now that we're here, and depending on whether you're following along as we're going, or whether you've paused the video to get your install going and stuff like that, the next thing that we're going to do is actually play around with this one really super basic program. So what I would usually do is I'd go to File, Open Folder, and I would pick a folder that I wanted to work in, or I'd create a folder. So I've actually created a folder already here called Getting Started. Select this folder, and I can go to my Explorer here, and this shows that I have a file in this folder. If I didn't have a file in this folder, actually, I'm going to delete this file. Cycle bit? Yeah, sure. And I'm going to create a new file. So this will be good. So now I'm in the state that you might be in if you just created a folder that you want to start working in and you didn't have a file yet. And I might create a file here called Hello World, and the file extension on it is .py, which is something that identifies it as a Python file. You notice that the icon here changes. If I don't have anything there, it says this is some kind of generic file. I'm not sure what this is, and saying it's not valid at the moment as well. But if I say py, it actually changes to the Python icon, which is the same as this Python icon here. I mean, it's not the same colors, but it's the same shape. And that's identifying for Visual Studio that this is a Python file, actually. Just move that out of the way of my face so you can see it clearly. All right, so I create that, and here I have hello world.py. And so now I have my Python file, and I can start writing code in there. Let me just increase the font size a little bit there so you can see it. Okay. So I'm going to recreate that little bit of code that was there before. Hello World is a historical thing in programming, which was, I think, one of the first programs that was used at a particular time. I think it was actually I think they were sending some information. They could send 8 characters specifically, so they sent Was it that? I think it was this. If you're a program history buff, you can look this up and correct me if I'm wrong. But I think they sent these 8 characters across like a network connection or something, and it was like, and it's become a thing in programming to use "Hello World" to represent a kind of simplest possible program that we can use just to see if our programming is working or not. So I'm going to create a thing that says "Hello World." Actually, you know what? I'm not going to be too precious about the number of letters I use. I think before it was MSG, but I'm going to call it message. Hello world. I'm going to put an exclamation mark on it because I'm very happy about this. Well, we'll see. If it works, I'm happy. If not, I will not. And then I'm going to use print, and I'm going to print out the message. This dot up here means I haven't saved it, so I'm going to Control S to save that. And then I'm going to try running this. There's a few different ways we can run this, actually. There's this big play button on the top right corner. So that's the obvious one that says this is going to run what I'm doing. If my install has worked correctly and I press this, it should run fine. Okay, so here it's gone, okay, Python, and then hello world.py, and then, so this is the command that was run when I pressed the play button. And here we have hello world, which is the message that I put there. So this is how I know that my program is running correctly, because it was able to print out hello world. Now, you don't have to know that it was supposed to print out hello world because you haven't seen Python before. I know enough about Python to know that this print thing is meant to make these letters appear down here. This thing is a terminal. Depending how old school you are with computing, you may or may not have seen terminals before. Terminals used to be the way that we would run computers. So they show you where you are. So on my computer, it's just I'm in my documents folder, and I've made a folder for the school and for the getting started course. And so I'm here on my C drive on my computer. So it's kind of like you're looking at a particular folder at a particular time. If I open this up here, which is a file explorer, which is you can't see much of it, but don't worry, you don't have to read it to know what I'm looking at here. I have the same directory, and I have my hello world.py file there. So me being at this location here is the same as me looking at it in this kind of explorer window. The only difference is here we can actually type things in to do stuff. So I can type something in like Python hello world.py, and it spits out hello world. So this is actually my preferred way of doing things, because I like to just be able to type these things in here and do them. The play button is fine though. If you want to use it, it will work just fine. So the thing that you might get in Visual Studio is you might not be in the correct directory. So it depends if you opened the directory via Visual Studio. If you did, it'll probably be okay. It'll probably be in that directory. But if not, you can move around in these directories using the command cd. So this is like super old school programming, right? We've been doing this since the 80s. Well, not programming, just navigating a computer. When you're in the console here, or the terminal, sorry, all of these things seem to have lots of different names. So some people would call it a console, and in different computing systems it's called a console, and other computing systems it's called a terminal. I'll try to keep it with the language that's actually in the menus and stuff here. So this is in the terminal here. CD stands for change directory. So I can type in this particular command, which is cd dot dot. That's just a code that I have memorized over the years of working in terminals. Um, don't worry if you don't know all this stuff. It's here in the video. You can look it up if you need. So cd dot dot goes up a level. So now I'm in the Mark Chi School folder instead of the Getting Started folder. If I want to go to my Getting Started folder, oh, oops. I think because I've got a space in the name, I need to put this in quotes. Yeah, this will get getting started. The other thing you can do, which makes things easier as well, if I go cd dot dot, I can just type like the first letter and then press tab, and it will autocomplete. Like it'll only autocomplete if it can only find one option, but otherwise it will try to complete what you've started typing. There you go. I get in my getting started. Another thing that's cool about the terminal is if I want to repeat things I've done before, I'm pressing the up and down arrow keys now, so I can go back through the history of the things that I've done. So if I run a one run, what if I want to run my Python program again? Python hello world.py, and it spits out hello world. Okay, that's just kind of the technicality of what we're doing. Um, what I would also, actually, maybe not. You know what? I was going to talk about what we're actually doing with code and things like that, and about this being a program. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave that to the next video because I think this one's gone on long enough. So hopefully from this video, everyone's been able to get their uh, Visual Studio Code installed, Python installed, and the extension for Python installed, and then being able to create a folder either through your file explorer, or even I think you can create folders in here. Yeah, you can create folders in here if you want to as well. And then create a hello world Python program. So the code for it is pretty simple. You can copy the code that I've used here into yours and try to run it either with the play button here or simply typing in Python hello world.py. If you're not getting those results, then it's kind of worth typing in something like this Python version here, Python space dash dash version, and it'll tell you whether Python is installed on your system. If that's not working, then we excuse me, I need to go back here and make sure that we've actually got our Python installed correctly. If the nice pretty colors aren't working here, then we need to go check whether our extension is installed in VS Code. If you don't have this window, then VS Code isn't installed. So there's there's little bits and pieces that you can check on to make sure it's working. Another thing I should say, if you would like to get more information about this and learn more about what's going on, I have a Patreon which will allow you access to a Discord. And on that Discord, you could ask me questions about the install and things like that. So I will put the link to the Patreon in the description below. And if you're interested, there's a few different tiers on the Patreon for you to get different levels of help from me. So if this video is not enough to get you set up and you want to ask some questions about it, you can sign up for that. That'll be it for now. In the next video, I'm going to start talking about the nature of programming and the nature of communicating with your computer and things like that. So once we've got all this set up, before we start really diving into it and writing code and things, I want to talk a bit about what it means to program computers and what it means to work with computers. But stick around for that next time. I will, yeah, I guess if you want to know when I'm publishing that next video, it would make sense to subscribe to the channel. I gotta do it, right? I'm on YouTube now, so I gotta ask people to like and subscribe, all that kind of stuff. But anyway, I've been Mark Chi, and this has been the first episode of the Getting Started series for the Mark Chi School for kids who can't code good and want to learn to do other stuff good. Thanks for sticking around, and I will see you next time.